I know exactly where I was on 9/11. I know exactly where I was, how that day happened, what the weather was like, who I was with. I know everything about 9/11. I can write about it. I can tell you about it because I actually lived through it. What I can't do is write about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I wasn't even alive. But that's what the Quran does. The earliest copies of the Quran don't even exist because they were all burned. Did you know that? The Quran that exists today, that most Muslims have, wasn't published until 1923. By the way, the reason we're going to look at Islam and the Quran is because that's the only real other avenue that we have to explore. We'll touch on that later, but back to the Quran. Islam in a nutshell. In 57 AD, 500 years after Jesus, a man named Muhammad was born. Around the age of 40, he was praying in a cave when an angel appeared to him and told him to recite the word of the Lord. Recite. So Muhammad was illiterate. He didn't know how to write. The Quran is a book to recite. So Muhammad freaks out. He goes crazy. He goes to his wife. His wife is like, yo, the same thing happened to my Christian friend. You're a prophet. He doesn't believe he's a prophet. He thinks he's crazy. But somehow he convinces himself, his wife convinces him that he's a prophet, so he goes around proclaiming these things that he believes the angel Gabriel tells him on behalf of Allah, and people start reciting these things. Some people wrote them down on rocks, on walls, on whatever. This goes on for 23 years. Muhammad dies at 63. 20 years after his death, the new leader of Islam says, hey, we should probably gather all this stuff that Muhammad's been saying and compile a book. So they do, but it never gets published. He gives it to Muhammad's wife. 200 to 300 years later, there's all these teachings of Muhammad floating around. Side note, the first gospel written about Jesus was between 20 and 40 years after his death. The first biography of Muhammad was written 140 years after his death. It's called the Sida. And even that book was recompiled by a guy who took out things that the original guy wrote because he didn't like things that were said about Muhammad. That's like your grandchild, some of you teenagers think, your grandchild writing about me based off of a book that they read by someone else's grandchild in here that wrote about me. Makes no sense. Back to our issue. So two guys approach this Islam leader, right? And the one dude's like, Muhammad said this, and the other guy's like, Muhammad said that. And so the guy says, hey, there's too many of these teachings of Muhammad floating around. We need to gather up all these teachings. We need to gather up all these things that people have been writing down about Muhammad. So he gathers all these teachings, this new leader of Islam, picks out what he wants to go in this book, publishes 5 copies, and burns everything else, including the original text that was given to Muhammad's wife. This can be found in Volume 6, Book 61 in the Hadith 509 and 510. It gets worse. Because the Quran is written in Arabic, and it was a newer language at that time, it took long to write. 300 years after Muhammad's death, a man named Ibn Mujab says, hey, there's way too many versions of this Quran floating around, and people are reciting this thing differently. He then narrows it down to 10 official readings, but each reading has 8 different ways to recite. So there's 80 different ways to recite the Quran. That continued to 1923. Between 1923 and 25, one Arabic manuscript was chosen and published as what you have today, which is called the Quran. Islam. We already showed you that the Quran is incorrect, but let's really push them off the mountain a little bit. Muhammad. We discussed earlier the first biography written on Muhammad was 140 years after his death, and that biography was condensed and compiled by a biography written by another guy who took out things because he didn't like certain things. Now, there are hundreds of things about Muhammad that are not out there that Muslims don't know that imams are hiding. Perhaps it's the fact that he beheaded 500 to 800 Jews. Perhaps it's the fact that he beheaded young boys. Perhaps that he had a mother murdered who was breastfeeding her child in front of her other children because she was saying bad things about him. Maybe it's the fact that he had 12 wives, with the youngest being 9. Maybe it's the fact that chapter 4, verse 24 of the Quran, inspired by Muhammad, allows Muslim to be involved in sex trafficking. Listen, I mean no disrespect when it comes to Muslims, but these are things they need to know. And most of them don't know because just like atheists and sadly just like Christians, they just go by what they're told.